Hey, what's happening, guys? What's going on, YouTube? And thank you for tuning into Rules for Rebels. I got a fascinating story for you guys today. Today's story is titled From Mormon Kid to Alleged Drug Kingpin, Inside the Rise and Fall of Aaron Shamu. Now, I realize this is a little bit different than the type of content we normally do on here. It is somewhat business and entrepreneurship related. This kid was an entrepreneur. He was a bright kid, a talented kid, but obviously he went in the wrong direction and let greed get the best of him. And one thing I noticed about entrepreneurs, a lot of entrepreneurs have a past. They have a history. They've been in trouble for something. A lot of times that's why people go into entrepreneurship, because they've kind of been blackballed or blacklisted from working for other people in traditional employment because of their past. But also I think entrepreneurs are wired a little bit differently. I think entrepreneurs like taking risks. We can tend to be kind of impulsive, and I think a lot of times that can lead entrepreneurs kind of down the wrong path. So this is a fascinating story. I think it's also a cautionary tale. And this kid was using the deep web, the dark web, to do this. Bitcoin, Monero, cryptocurrencies, etc. And while this gentleman was caught with $1.2 million, obviously he had a house and other assets. In the grand scheme of things, this is almost peanuts. I was reading another interesting story the other day about two young kids who kind of had a similar business set up. And when they got busted, I think one of them had $20 million worth of Bitcoin. Another one had $18 million worth of Monero on top of, all the assets and all the other things that they'd bought. So 1.2 million in a lot of senses is almost peanuts. And it's really amazing how big, not to glorify it by any means, but it's really amazing how large and how big this industry is. A lot of your favorite movie stars, rappers, a lot of the business moguls that you look up to, a lot of them don't even have $20 million or $38 million. Like some of these young kids who literally are just themselves working off a laptop have. But this is one of the best written kind of local news stories I've ever read. It's kind of a fascinating story. And there's a part of the story I'm going to skip where it's just like a bunch of stats about the rise of fentanyl abuse and things like that. I really kind of just wanted to cover the story about Aaron Shamu. And this kid was entrepreneurial. He read a lot of kind of personal development books. He had actually worked for eBay for a time. And after leaving his job at eBay, he was actually frustrated that his supervisors at eBay weren't taking into consideration his insights in terms of how to kind of streamline business and make things better. He actually enlisted two former eBay employees he worked with to help kind of run this drug operation. So, like I said, I know it's a little bit different than what we normally do, but I thought it was interesting because it involves eBay employees, because it's sort of in a roundabout way entrepreneurship, and really it's just a fascinating story. So, without further ado, let's get into it. And a couple paragraphs in here, I am going to skip down a bit. For weeks, Aaron Shamu had felt a sense of foreboding. He didn't know how to describe it really, but sitting in his basement playing Xbox, it was a feeling he just couldn't shake. It was 2 days before Thanksgiving, and outside his split-level home in Cottonwood Heights, it looked like it was the first big storm of winter was on its way. It was a little unusual for a 26-year-old to be able to afford to live in a neighborhood like this, where houses went for $500,000, and the neighbor across the street had a koi pond and a big cream-colored boat. But there was nothing about Shamu that gave anyone pause. An Eagle Scout, he'd been a deacon in the Mormon church as a kid, passing the sacrament on Sundays, but these days he didn't go to church much. Neighbors noticed he slept in, seemed to go to bed late, but that wasn't really weird either, even for a 26-year-old. They'd see him pulling out of his driveway in his black BMW or wearing a tank top to show off his ripped physique. Shamu would wave, maybe say hi, but he mostly kept to himself. No one who lived on the Titan Way would ever guess the DEA considered him one of the most successful drug dealers in Utah, a kingpin of something called the Darknet, and no one would ever suspect that he had $1.2 million in cash tucked away in his basement. The DEA believed Shamu ran a global operation based largely on a synthetic opioid known as fentanyl, which is 50 times more powerful than heroin and linked to overdose deaths across the country. If they were right, he represented the rise of a new kind of drug dealer, an alarming shift in the way Americans were getting illicit narcotics. Traditionally, drug trafficking organizations had operated like sophisticated corporations, employing hundreds, if not thousands, of people to move loads of marijuana, cocaine, and methamphetamine from the fields or super labs of Mexican states of Sinaloa and Michoacan to the street corners of Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York. It was a complex and efficiently organized logistics system that relied on everything from tractor trailers with hidden compartments to fishing boats that unloaded on remote beaches along the northern coast of California. And this next part is kind of interesting. Even outside of drug networks and things like that, if you've ever watched, Pablo, is Pablo what that Netflix show is called? Or documentaries or movies like Blow, you know that these drug organizations have hundreds, if not thousands of employees spread out across the world. They have, tractor trailers and boats and all this stuff. And technology has kind of shifted and enabled, some 20-something kid and maybe a buddy with a laptop and a Tor browser to, run an organization the size of something that, formerly took thousands of well-organized people. The internet's doing that with a lot of different industries, but it's just kind of interesting to see how it's done that with this as well. But now, just as it had done with countless other industries, the internet was disrupting the drug game. Darknet dealers didn't need anything other than a laptop, a rudimentary understanding of the internet, and a mailing address. Shamu, it seemed, had perfected his new method of drug distribution. Shamu certainly didn't look the part of a stereotypical drug dealer. Clean-cut and fastidious about his diet, he loved working out and reading motivational books like The Secret, learning how to manifest his goals. Always smiling, he punctuated nearly every sentence with a laugh. He knew that when people met him, saw the beamer and a gleaming white smile, they might dismiss him as a guy who dropped out of Utah Valley University, interested mostly in girls and partying and making a lot of money. But if Shamu had to describe himself, he'd say he was a closet nerd. That's what he told girls when he met them, just so they wouldn't freak out when they walked into his apartment and saw what looked like an IT closet in his bedroom, with stacks of servers and black cords snaking around the carpet. Back then, Shamu was in college. He'd started something called Bitcoin mining. When people asked how he made money, he told them he traded Bitcoins, the online currency. Most people didn't know what Bitcoins were, so the questions usually stopped there. That morning, a pale winter haze hung over the valley. It was about 10 a.m. and Shamu was in his basement playing a video game called Battlefield 1. He planned to fly to San Antonio for Thanksgiving with his girlfriend the next day to surprise his family. He wanted to get married soon, move to California, and start a new life away from Utah. And yet something felt off. He noticed someone following him the other day, running 3 red lights to stay on his tail. Suddenly, he heard a loud crash above him. He dropped his Xbox controller and rushed upstairs, and then he froze, too stunned to move. A battering ram had busted his front door off the hinges. SWAT officers in riot gear and black masks stood in the doorway, staring him down. Shamu felt his body go numb. "Freeze!" one of the SWAT officers said from behind a shield, pointing what looked like a machine gun. Two DEA agents flashed their badges. "Careful with these guys," one of them said. "They're a little trigger-happy." They took him upstairs and cuffed him. "Don't try to run," one of them said. Later, this would strike Shamu as almost funny in kind of a tragic way. Where would he run? He was trapped, and no matter what happened from here, his life would never be the same. Now, I'm going to skip this next section. It really just kind of goes on about stats about opioid abuse. Let's see. He heard about what began fueling heroin, so the fentanyl. Okay, we'll kind of cut down to here. What's driving the spread of fentanyl is largely economics, Huber said. Because of its strength, a dealer can order 1 kilo from a clandestine lab in China for $3,500, cut it into pills with the same coloration and markings as the oxycodone pill, and sell it on the street for $30 a pill. 1 kilo of fentanyl can produce close to 30 million pills, Huber said, and depending on the market, those pills can generate a profit of 6 million to 20 million. Those profit margins are irresistible if you check your moral agency, Huber said. The problem is we're not talking about science here. I'm talking about Beavis and Butthead making pills. Because he's in the bathroom or wherever else grinding up the fentanyl in a coffee grinder while he watches The Price is Right, he can't figure out how much fentanyl is going into each pill, Besser said. So if you're the unlucky sap that got the pill that happens to be hot, the moment you take it, you're going to die. When the DEA raided Shamu's Cottonwood Heights home and stash house in South Jordan last November, they found a pill press, $1.2 million in cash, and 95,000 pills that could have been sold for as much as $2.2 million, according to court records. Shamu has pleaded not guilty, but if convicted, he would be one of the biggest darknet drug dealers to ever successfully be prosecuted in the U.S. The allegations against him document the way technology is fundamentally altering the drug game and how hard it is becoming for law enforcement to stop the flow of illicit narcotics. It's also a story of small decisions and big consequences, and the choices a kid who grew up in a devout Mormon family in the suburbs of Phoenix made that led him to a prison cell facing a possible life sentence. I want people to know that I'm not like a guy in the cartel or some Pablo Escobar, Shamu said earlier this month from a Weber County jail in a series of interviews with the Desert News. My parents would say I'm a good kid. Shamu paused for a moment looking at the ground. A wan smile came across his lips. I would have never imagined I'd end up here, he said. The good son. Mike and Becky Shamu had always been devout members of the LDS Church, and they took seriously in the belief that God communicated to them through the Holy Ghost. In the late 80s, they had 3 daughters, but since there was another child waiting in heaven to be born, that child was Aaron. From the beginning, Aaron was different than his sisters. They were driven and excelled at sports, particularly soccer. Aaron's parents put him in sports too, soccer, baseball, football, but he wasn't particularly good at any of them. And unlike his sisters who would all go to BYU, Aaron struggled in school. His parents knew he was smart. They'd seen him figure out tricks in Nintendo games at the age of 4, and in junior high he could beat most adults at chess, but he had little interest in getting good grades. My mom is very driven, and she was determined to help Aaron, his older sister Stephanie Shamu said. She tried tutoring everything. In junior high, Aaron started hanging out with a crowd that worried his parents. His mom asked him why he didn't join the chess club. He didn't want to be known as a nerd, he told her. Mostly he wanted to play video games, in particular first-person shooter games like Halo. He started ditching school and refusing to go to church. He started smoking marijuana and fighting with his parents, and so at the age of 15 they sent him to Ensazi Wilderness Camp in the desert of Arizona, where for 9 weeks he learned to start fires with sticks and camp under the stars with little more than a pack and a tarp. My parents think I ran with a bad crowd, he said, but he seemed like a pretty normal teenager, Stephanie said. Where we lived in Arizona, there were a lot of LDS people, and I think they wanted him to have more Mormon friends, and he didn't. A year after Anasazi, Aaron was back to skipping school and smoking marijuana, so his parents enrolled him at Cross Creek, a lockdown facility in Laverkin, Utah. Aaron stayed at Cross Creek for 2 years, where he earned his high school diploma and his Eagle Scout award. This time, Aaron seemed to truly have changed when he came home. The explosive temper that had unsettled his parents was gone. He lived at home for 6 months and was so pleasant to be around, his mom said, she didn't want him to leave for college. But in 2009, he moved to Utah, where he enrolled at the University in Orem. Aaron loved it. He dated as much as he could, often taking girls longboarding on the streets around campus. He even started going back to church and briefly considered going on a mission. Aaron was happy. He spent weekends with his friends wakeboarding on Utah Lake or riding motorcycles up in Provo Canyon, but his parents noticed he wasn't going to class. He even failed rock climbing. His parents decided that if he wasn't going to attend class, they weren't going to pay for tuition or housing. It was at this time that Aaron became interested in Bitcoins, the world's first decentralized currency. Attached to no country or central bank, encrypted transactions took place online between users directly without an intermediary. It was a new form of digital cash that was completely untraceable. That's actually not true. Bitcoin actually is very untraceable, but we see a lot of these mistakes kind of made in articles by people who aren't familiar with cryptocurrency. Aaron had always been fascinated with starting his own business, becoming an entrepreneur. He idolized Steve Jobs and Arnold Schwarzenegger, 2 self-made millionaires. Since coming to Utah, he'd come up with all sorts of novel ways to make money. He sold plasma, got paid to click online ads, and began ordering knockoff designer jeans from China and selling them at a big markup. Because Bitcoins were new, Aaron believed he could make money trading them just like any other market exchange. At this point, Aaron moved to Salt Lake City with a friend he'd met at UVU named Drew Crandall, a lanky redhead who grew up in Utah. Also raised Mormon but no longer attending, Crandall and Shamu immediately hit it off. They both liked cars and electronic music. They started clubbing around Salt Lake City, and Shamu taught Crandall, who he describes as socially awkward and shy, how to talk to girls. And this is Shamu and Crandall here. Shamu's on the left, Crandall's on the right. They both took a job at eBay, and here's where eBay comes in. They both took a job at eBay in 2013, handling customer support calls. Shamu liked the job at first, but before long, he became frustrated that his supervisors wouldn't take his suggestions on how to streamline their operations. By 2015, Shamu and Crandall had both quit. According to charging documents, one of their friends from eBay eventually reached out to Shamu and asked how he was making so much money. Bitcoins, he told her. She asked if she could help. Shamu allegedly told her he did have something going he could use her for. Accept mail and deliver it to his house. He was involved in something called the Darknet. Breaking Bad. In 2011, around the time Shamu was getting involved in Bitcoins and trading, an agent with the Department of Homeland Security named Jared Yagayan was standing in a windowless mailroom in Chicago when a customs officer handed him an envelope they just seized from O'Hare Airport. It had come on a flight from the Netherlands. Inside the envelope was a tiny pink pill embossed with the symbol of a squirrel. The customs officer said they'd been getting these sort of shipments for weeks. That pill, which tested as the club drug ecstasy, eventually led Jurgen to discover a website called Silk Road, which customers were using to order any drug imaginable: MDMA, LSD, marijuana, meth, with Bitcoin. Silk Road operated on a darknet, which was accessible through the Tor browser. Originally developed by the United States Naval Research Laboratory, Tor, an acronym for the Onion Router, for its layers of encryption, allowed people to use the internet without revealing their location. The founder of Silk Road, a doctoral student at the University of Texas named Ross Ulbright, had radical libertarian ideas. He liked the idea of a marketplace unfettered by government regulation and the perverse irony of using the internet built by the U.S. government and a darknet developed by American intelligence to move drugs through the U.S. Postal Service. Ulbright shared similarities with Shamu. Both were Eagle Scouts, both came from educated upper-middle-class families, and both shared a fascination with computers and technology. They were both fans of the TV show Breaking Bad, which tells the story of a high school chemistry teacher who becomes a drug dealer. Shamu's family wonders how much of this show may have inspired him. During a series of jailhouse interviews, Shamu declined to answer any questions related to drugs or the darknet, worried saying something might implicate him. He did say he was aware of Silk Road and Ulbright, but declined to elaborate. A friend of Shamu's told a Homeland Security agent that Shamu was known for selling blues, or prescription pain pills, and Xanax at local clubs. Shamu said in interviews with the Desert News that at times he smoked marijuana and drank, but declined to say if he'd ever used pain pills or harder drugs himself. According to law enforcement, Shamu began selling drugs over the darknet in 2014 when he and Crandall ordered latex gloves, postage bubble wrap, and gelatin capsules to set up a pill press. Sometime in 2014, Shamu allegedly hired two friends from eBay, Alexandria Tong and her roommate Catherine Buston, to receive packages at their apartment in South Jordan. They were paid $200 to $300 a package, charging documents say. In June of 2015, after receiving 4 or 5 packages, Tong asked Shamu and Crandall if she could make more money working for them, according to court documents. Tong told police that Crandall taught her and Buston how to package drugs in vacuum-sealed Mylar bags and showed them how to unencrypt emails that contained orders. According to court records, Shamu allegedly sold drugs under the vendor title PharmaMaster on Alphabay, which is currently the biggest darknet market. The first known reference to PharmaMaster on Alphabay came in November of 2015. In January, PharmaMaster got its first review, which was positive, and throughout that winter and early spring, word of PharmaMaster's reliability and the quality of his pills started to spread. Vendor always responds in about an hour, one customer wrote of PharmaMaster shipments of Xanax and oxycodone pills laced with fentanyl. The best I've ever seen, wrote another. I think one of the best pill vendors on the market, throws extras in every order. It's like a fucking Happy Meal. Prices are good. Communication is exceptional. Now, one thing to keep in mind here, obviously, this kid went down the wrong route. Obviously, he was doing something bad and causing a lot of harm to people. But think about this. The same things that make a successful Shopify store, a successful eBay store, responding to customers quickly, providing a good product, giving extras or bonuses, delivering more than people expect. These are all things that work in traditional business. So potentially, had this kid decided to go down the proper route as opposed to kind of going down the wrong road, he probably would have been successful in regular business as well. Carrying on, by this time, according to charging documents, Shamu had hired 2 more friends living in Orem to receive packages for him, which sometimes came in wooden shipping boxes. He typically picked up the packages himself or had his friends deliver them to the house at Cottonwood Heights. Nicholas Christian, an associate research professor at Carnegie Mellon who studies the darknet and has built a historic database of vendors, said during this period PharmaMaster was selling Valium, Xanax, oxycodone, MDMA, fentanyl, Viagra, and fentanyl powder. While most vendors list small amounts, an ounce or two, PharmaMaster was advertising drugs in bulk quantities putting PharmaMaster in the top #1 spot of all distributors on Alphabay. At one point, Christian said PharmaMaster was clearing a couple $1,000s a day in sales. Shamu's sister Stephanie said she didn't have any suspicions. If anything, her brother seemed happier than ever before. In January 2016, he and a group of friends visited her home near Lake Tahoe. They all attended a popular electronic music festival called Snow Globe together. In the ensuing months, her brother would regularly check in with phone calls and texts with what Stephanie calls typical stuff. They'd talk about girls, and she'd encourage him to stock away money to buy a house and get married. He was thinking about going back to school, Stephanie recalled. He said, "Yeah, I can't do this forever." I thought he was talking about Bitcoin. By May of 2016, customers in Alphabay started complaining about PharmaMaster's OPSEC, or operational security. Where PharmaMaster had once taken great care to discreetly ship pills in vacuum-sealed envelopes, it was now getting reckless and sloppy. "That's it," one user seized. Incredulous that PharmaMaster had shipped a load of drugs in an open Chips Ahoy cookie bag. "Cookies were fucking everywhere when I opened a package, and now I have to vacuum my floor." By this time, Crandall, who had once allegedly taught his friends how to carefully package shipments and use unencrypted email to communicate, was no longer as intimately involved in business, according to charging documents. And this is another interesting thing. You know, a lot of businesses, when they're the pride and joy of the person who built the business, a lot of times when people step away, quality can suffer, and we kind of saw that happen here as well. And to the right here, we have a photo from Alphabay of this Chips Ahoy package that the drugs came in. He left the country in 2015 and was now traveling. He left the country in 2015 and was now traveling throughout Southeast Asia with his girlfriend. But now and then, Crandall would check in from places like Cambodia and Laos, law enforcement say, to help with orders. By June of 2016, PharmaMaster was on the radar of the Postal Service, Homeland Security, and the DEA, and packages regularly started getting seized, according to comments left on Reddit and Alphabay. Despite the fact that packages were getting seized, Shamu showed no signs of slowing, court documents say. In June of 2016, he allegedly ordered 40 grams of fentanyl from China, which is enough to press 40,000 pills. While the DEA says counterfeit oxycodone can go for as much as $40 a pill on the street, PharmaMaster sold the pills for $8 to $10 each on Alphabay, meaning profits on this shipment alone could have been anywhere from $400,000 to $1.6 million. In the weeks before his arrest, Shamu said he felt uneasy. "Things weren't adding up," he recalled in an interview from jail. "I was definitely on edge. I wasn't comfortable in my own skin. I wasn't feeling good about where I was in my life. I kind of suspected something was going on." Mostly, he liked to stay home on weekends watching movies with his girlfriend and drinking a little wine. "I was becoming a little more distant from my friends, kind of getting out of the party scene, and I wasn't going out. I wasn't clubbing anymore. I definitely thought something bad was coming." If Shamu sensed he was under surveillance, he was right. By November 2016, according to charging documents, Homeland Security had flipped 4 confidential informants, and at least one was wearing a wire. The informants began explaining the inner workings of Shamu's operation and turning over shipments of pills that tested positive for fentanyl and alprazolam, the chemical used to make Xanax. In the final days before Shamu's arrest, agents seized 68 packages headed to 27 states and more than 5,700 pills, which either contained fentanyl or alprazolam, according to charging documents. Most users had started complaining about PharmaMaster's oxy pills, warning others they could be lethal. "I'd be wary of any amateur presses containing something as strong as potentially deadly as fentanyl. It takes some expensive equipment and lots of experience to get a homogeneous mixture before pressing," one user warned on a Reddit forum discussing PharmaMaster. "Man, I just shot one of those pills and it is the closest I've ever come to overdosing," another user wrote. "That was extremely scary. It kept coming stronger and stronger and stronger, and I was like, no, not like this. I want to live." When agents from the DEA and Homeland Security raided Shamu's Cottonwood Heights home on November 22nd, those seizing the evidence donned hazmat suits to avoid direct contact with fentanyl, which is so powerful a few flakes touching the skin could have caused officers to overdose, said Rusty Payne at the DEA headquarters in Washington, D.C. Agents set up a processing area under a white tent on the driveway of a neighbor and spent an hour removing evidence. Neighbors were stunned to see the FBI hauling out sacks of cash. A month later, an arrest warrant was issued for Drew Crandall, who at the time was living in Australia. In photos posted on Instagram, Crandall either seemed blissfully unaware he was a wanted man or hardly worried about his capture. He and his girlfriend posted pictures posing with tigers in Thailand or kayaking around islands in New Zealand. On January 10th, he posted a picture from Bali wearing a suit he bought for his wedding. 4 months later, he flew to Hawaii to get married and was arrested upon landing at the Honolulu airport and sent to Utah. On May 31st, U.S. Attorney for Utah John Huber announced Crandall's arrest and named 4 other co-conspirators charged as part of Shamu's ring. He also announced he was seeking a life sentence for Shamu. Authorities said Shamu has sent about 500,000 fake oxycodone pills across the country. What we feared and hoped somehow would stay away has arrived in spades, Huber said. Fentanyl is as dangerous as it gets. When Aaron Shamu was arrested, he didn't call anyone. His sister Stephanie isn't sure why. I don't know if he didn't want to disappoint everybody, she said. The whole thing has been devastating for us and the family. Everybody at some point in their lives makes a decision they wish they could take back. On a recent June morning, seated behind plexiglass and wearing a standard blue jumpsuit for prisoners at the Weber County Jail, Shamu said it was still surreal to be in a cell. He had imagined an entirely different life for himself. A year ago, he even imagined starting a business, wearing a suit, being married, and having children. You know, the white picket fence and all that, he said with a sad, wistful smile. He had started reading The Secret again, a book about manifesting your goals and dreams, and he still did that, but now they all lay somewhere in the far-off future. And here, you can't really think about certain things. If you start worrying, it just goes deeper and deeper, he said. So I try to keep busy, I try to keep positive, but I would never wish jail on anybody. It is likely that the U.S. Attorney's Office hopes to make an example of Shamu by pushing for a life sentence, but it's doubtful that his arrest will do much to discourage others from trying to sell drugs on a darknet. 2 days after his arrest, a user on Reddit recommended a new vendor on Alphabay. So as you know, PharmaMaster got booked, the Reddit user Dead Flargy wrote. He was #1 in the Fend Oxy industry, leaving Earbars #2. Now that Pharma is gone, that leaves Earbars #1. As of Wednesday, Alphabay had more than 300,000 listings, including more than 240,000 for drugs alone. So this is obviously a little bit of an older article since Alphabay got taken down last summer. But I thought this article was, A, it's just kind of a fascinating story. B, this kid kind of fancied himself an entrepreneur, and had he gone down a different path, probably would have been a successful, legitimate entrepreneur. And then lastly, I thought the fact that this involved, him having worked at eBay and then recruiting former eBay employees or his former eBay coworkers. I thought it just might be of interest to you guys. Thought you guys might enjoy this story. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If so, please give it a thumbs up. If you're not subscribed to my channel, hit that subscribe button below. And if you guys have any comments about the article, anything you want to share, any thoughts, whatever else, drop a comment down below. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll catch you on the next video.